My family thought banning me from Thanksgiving would break me, but they didn't know it gave me the perfect timeline to orchestrate the most public, humiliating revenge of their lives, right when they needed to look their best. The vibration of my phone against the cheap laminate desk of my dorm room sounded like a chainsaw in the quiet library, but the text message that lit up the screen cut deeper than any blade ever could. It was 2 days before Thanksgiving, the time of year when the air in Columbus, Ohio, turns crisp and smells like wood smoke and anticipation. For most students at Ohio State, this was the week of packing bags, laundry runs, and excited calls home. For me, it was the week I realized I was officially disposable. Don't come this year, Jenna. We need less stress, not more. I stared at the words, reading them over and over until they blurred into a senseless gray smudge. It was from Darlene. I rarely called her mom inside my own head anymore. Mom implied warmth, safety, and hot cocoa after a bad day. Darlene implied management, public relations, and critique. The message didn't even have a sign-off. Just a command and a justification that felt like a slap across the face. Less stress. As if my existence, my physical presence in the house I grew up in, was a hazard to their health. Growing up in our house was less like being raised in a family and more like being an employee in a high-stakes corporate firm where the CEO was emotionally unstable. Thanksgiving wasn't a holiday. It was a competitive sport. Darlene treated the fourth Thursday of November like the Super Bowl of suburban perfection. The table settings had to be geometrically precise. The turkey had to look like it was painted by Norman Rockwell, and the family had to look like we actually liked each other. God forbid a hair was out of place or a smile didn't reach the eyes in the mandatory 3-hour photo shoot she orchestrated before we were allowed to eat a single bite. I was always the difficult one. That was the label Darlene and my father had slapped on me somewhere around age 12. In their dictionary, difficult didn't mean rebellious or dangerous. It meant I asked questions. It meant I didn't want to wear the itchy, color-coordinated sweater Darlene bought. It meant I didn't let my older brother, Brent, walk all over me. Brent was the golden boy, the one who could crash a car and get a hug, while I got a lecture for getting an A-. He was soft, pliable, and perfectly willing to be Darlene's prop. I was sharp edges and silence. Last year, the tension had reached a breaking point. I was drowning. I was juggling 2 part-time jobs, one at a coffee shop on High Street, and another filing papers at a law firm downtown, just to pay for the textbooks and tuition gaps my parents forgot to cover, despite fully funding Brent's lifestyle. I was taking a full load of senior-level classes, sleeping 4 hours a night, and running on caffeine and anxiety. When I told Darlene I couldn't come home 3 days early to help her deep clean the baseboards and polish the silver, she sighed that heavy, tragic sigh of hers. You never have time for family, Jenna. It's selfish, really. Brent is already here. Of course Brent was there. Brent didn't have a job. Brent had projects and ideas, and a girlfriend who liked to take selfies in our foyer. When the ban came through via text, I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't type out a long, emotional paragraph explaining that I was exhausted and just wanted a plate of food and a familiar bed. I simply muted the chat. I turned off my phone. I sat in the dim light of my dorm room, listening to the muffled sounds of the few other students left behind on campus. Thanksgiving Day was gray and drizzly. The campus felt like a ghost town. I walked to the gas station 3 blocks away, buying a box of instant mac and cheese and a bag of gummy worms. That was my feast. Back in my room, I made the mistake of opening Instagram, and there it was, the photo. They were posed in Grandma's living room, the one with the expensive cream carpet we weren't allowed to walk on with shoes. Darlene was beaming, wearing a new silk dress. Dad had his hand on Brent's shoulder, looking proud. Brent was smiling that lazy, entitled smile, his arm around his girlfriend. They looked perfect. They looked happy. And the caption, written by Brent, read, "So peaceful this year." It wasn't subtle. It was a direct shot. It was a public declaration that the family was better off without the difficult daughter. I sat there, the artificial cheese turning cold in the bowl, and I felt a tear slide down my cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, molten rage. They thought I was quiet because I was defeated. They thought I was staying away because I was ashamed. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that while they were clinking wine glasses and celebrating their peace, I was sitting on a secret that could burn their perfect reputation to the ground. I wasn't just working at a law firm for the paycheck. I was building a case. And the person helping me do it was the last person they would ever expect to see standing next to me. I looked at the picture one last time, took a screenshot, and whispered to the empty room, "Enjoy the peace while you can, Darlene." Reflection. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own home? Pushed out by the people who were supposed to protect you? It's a pain that changes you forever. I need you to hit that like button right now if you've ever had to fight for your own peace against your own blood. Smash that subscribe button because you do not want to miss how I took my power back in the most savage way possible. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? Let's show them that the survivors are everywhere. The winter months in Columbus are brutal, a seemingly endless stretch of gray skies and biting wind, but the ice in my veins was far colder than anything the Weather Channel predicted. After the Thanksgiving ban, I didn't go home for Christmas either. I told them I had an intercession course, which was a lie. I spent the holidays in the law library and the judge's chambers, filing motions and organizing case law for the Honorable Judge Mary Ann Keller. Judge Keller was terrifying to most people. She was 6 feet tall in heels, with silver hair cut in a sharp, architectural bob, and a gaze that could peel the truth right off your bones. But to me, she was the first adult who looked at my situation and didn't tell me to just get along. She saw the forensic evidence of my life, and she didn't like what she saw. The secret I was holding wasn't just about emotional neglect, it was financial. Back in January, I'd tried to lease an apartment, only to get rejected immediately. My credit score was in the tank. Why? Because Darlene and my father had taken out a high-interest credit card in my name 3 years ago to help build my credit. They had maxed it out on renovations for the guest bathroom, the one I wasn't allowed to use, and never paid it off. I was ready to file a police report the second I found out. I was ready to burn the house down. But Judge Keller stopped me. "Don't play checkers, Jenna," she had said, her voice like gravel and silk, as she reviewed my credit report. "Play chess. We get the money back, we seal the record so your future isn't tarnished by their felony, and we wait." She helped me strong-arm them legally. It was a masterclass in pressure. My parents paid every cent of the $5,000 back within 48 hours to avoid a fraud charge, terrified their country club friends would find out. They thought that was the end of it. They thought because I didn't press charges, I had forgiven them. They thought they had bought my silence and that we could go back to the status quo where I was the quiet, convenient doormat. They were wrong. By the time the cherry blossoms bloomed on campus, I was set to graduate summa cum laude, an honor nobody in my family thought I was capable of. That's when the silence from home finally broke. It started with a presumptive text from Dad. "Got the date for graduation. We'll need 4 tickets. Make sure they are good seats." Then Darlene, buzzing with newfound enthusiasm. "I bought a dress that matches your sash. We need to coordinate for the photos. Brent's girlfriend wants to do a reel for her blog about successful families." It made my stomach turn. They weren't coming to celebrate my academic achievement or my hard work. They were coming because a summa cum laude daughter looked good on Facebook. They were coming because Brent needed content for his girlfriend's follower count. They wanted to harvest the fruit of a tree they had refused to water. I looked at the unread messages, a cold smirk touching my lips. I didn't block them. I needed them there. I needed them in the front row, thinking they were in control. I replied to Darlene with 2 words: "Tickets reserved." I didn't tell them that the tickets, I confirmed, were for the general admission bleachers, while the VIP passes were going to someone else entirely. The stage was set, the players were assuming their positions, and they had no idea that the script had been rewritten months ago. The morning of graduation felt less like a ceremony, and more like a tactical operation. The air inside the Schottenstein Center was thick with humidity and excitement, a sea of scarlet and gray gowns swirling around the concourse. While other students were frantically adjusting their caps and hugging their roommates, I was standing in the shadows of the North Tunnel, my phone vibrating incessantly in my hand. "Where are you?" "We're in section 122. The lighting is terrible here. Come find us so we can fix your hair before the ceremony starts." "Darlene, Brent's hungry. Should we get pretzels now or wait? Also, hurry up." "Dad." Not a single congratulations. Not a, "we're proud of you." Just logistics and complaints. I didn't reply. I just smoothed the front of my gown. Checking my reflection in the glass of a trophy case, I looked calm, composed, and absolutely nothing like the scared girl they had banned from Thanksgiving. I peered out from the tunnel entrance, scanning the packed arena. It didn't take long to find them. They were impossible to miss. a cluster of performative wealth in a sea of normal families. Darlene was wearing a hat that was far too large for an indoor event, blocking the view of the poor soul behind her. Brent was scrolling on his phone, looking bored out of his mind, but it was the sign that made my blood boil. Held high by my father. It was a poster board glittering with gold letters. "Go Brent's sister." I stared at it, blinking to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. They hadn't even put my name on it. On the day I was graduating with the highest honors the university could bestow, I was still just an extension of their golden boy. A footnote in Brent's biography. It was so perfectly, painfully on brand, that I almost laughed. It washed away the last lingering shred of guilt I had about what was coming next. "Are you ready, Jenna?" The voice was low and steady. I turned to see Judge Marianne Keller standing beside me. She wasn't wearing her judicial robes today. Instead, she wore a sharp, navy blue power suit that screamed authority. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes landing on the section where my family sat, and her expression tightened just a fraction. "I saw the sign," she noted dryly. "Subtle." "It's about to get a lot less subtle," I said, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs, not of fear, but of adrenaline. "Remember," she said, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "You earned this seat. You earned this life. They are just spectators today." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale arena air. "Let's do this." I waited until the last possible second, just as the ushers were signaling for people to clear the aisles. The noise in the arena was deafening, a roar of thousands of conversations. But as I stepped out from the tunnel and onto the floor, the world seemed to narrow down to a single focal point. Section 122. I wasn't walking toward the student seating yet. I was walking straight toward the VIP family section, the area reserved for distinguished guests and faculty connections. The area my family thought they belonged in, but definitely didn't. I linked my arm through Judge Keller's, lifted my chin, and began the long walk across the floor. It was time to show them exactly who Brent's sister really was. As we neared the seating area, the noise of the crowd seemed to drop away, replaced by the rushing sound of my own blood in my ears. I could see them clearly now. Darlene was waving frantically, her smile tight and plastic, gesturing for me to come over to the railing so Brent could snap a picture from above. Dad was shaking that hideous sign, the glitter catching the overhead lights like a cheap disco ball. They looked at me, expecting the Jenna they knew, the one who would scurry over, apologize for being late, and beg for approval. Instead, I stopped 10 feet away. I didn't wave, I didn't smile. I just stood there, flanked by the one person on earth who terrified them. It took about 3 seconds for the recognition to hit. Darlene's hand, still mid-wave, faltered. Her eyes drifted from my face to the tall, imposing woman beside me. I watched the color drain from her face in real time, leaving her pale beneath her heavy foundation. She grabbed my father's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. He stopped shaking the sign, his jaw going slack. They knew her face. They knew her voice. They knew her signature at the bottom of the restitution agreement that had saved them from a felony fraud charge just months ago. To them, Judge Marianne Keller wasn't a graduation guest. She was the grim reaper of their reputation. Brent, oblivious at first, finally looked up from his phone. "What's going on? Why are you guys acting weird?" He followed their gaze, and when he saw the judge, his mouth actually fell open. He looked from her to me, the gears in his head grinding loudly. "Jenna?" Darlene hissed, her voice straining to bridge the distance without causing a scene. Why is she here with you?" The fear in her eyes was delicious. She wasn't asking why I had a guest. She was asking why I had brought their dirty laundry to the most public event of the year. She was terrified the judge was about to serve them papers or announce their crime to the surrounding parents. I didn't answer. I didn't owe her an explanation. Judge Keller adjusted her glasses, peering over the rim at my parents with the same look she gave defendants right before sentencing. "Hello, Darlene." "Robert," she said, her voice projecting effortlessly. "Lovely day for a graduation." My father looked like he was going to be sick. He lowered the "Go Brent's sister" sign slowly, hiding it behind his legs. We didn't know you knew Jenna," my father stammered, sweating visibly. "There is a lot you don't know about your daughter," Judge Keller replied coolly. She turned to me, offering a warm, genuine smile that she never showed in the courtroom. "Let's take our seats, Jenna. The procession is starting, and we have the front row." "Front row?" Brent echoed, sounding offended. "Honors seating," I said, speaking for the first time. For the people who actually supported me. I turned my back on them. I felt their eyes boring into my spine, stunned, furious, and confused as I walked away. We didn't head for the student section. We walked past the velvet rope into the distinguished guests area, right at the front of the stage. As I sat down, I glanced back. My family was still standing there, frozen, a portrait of panic in a sea of celebration. But the show was only just beginning. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance, long speeches about the future and unlimited potential that usually made me zone out. But today, every word felt electric. I sat in the plush chair of the distinguished guests section, flanked by department heads and local dignitaries. Judge Keller sat to my right, a silent sentinel against the chaos of my past. From my vantage point, I could occasionally catch a glimpse of Section 122. My family hadn't moved. They were glued to their seats, stiff and uncomfortable. Darlene had stopped preening for photos. The Go Brent's sister sign had vanished, likely stuffed under a seat in shame. They weren't looking at the stage. They were staring at the back of Judge Keller's head, whispering furiously to each other. They were in damage control mode, trying to figure out how much I had told her, how deep the betrayal went. They had no idea. As the provost began reading the names for the College of Arts and Sciences, the atmosphere shifted. It was a rhythmic drone of applause, pause, name, applause. I watched my classmates cross the stage, their smiles bright on the jumbotrons. Halfway through the ceremony, a hush fell over our section. Judge Keller leaned in close, her shoulder brushing mine. The smell of her expensive perfume, sandalwood and steel, filled my nose. "Don't look now," she whispered, her voice low enough that only I could hear. But the seating chart wasn't the only surprise I arranged. My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, keeping her eyes fixed on the stage, "that your parents think they are the only ones watching you today. They think they successfully isolated you." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "They're not the only ones who showed up, Jenna." A cold shiver ran down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. "Who?" "Turn around," she murmured. Slowly. "Look at the last row, near the west exit, under the overhang." I hesitated. My hands gripped the armrests of my chair. I turned my head slowly, scanning the sea of faces behind me. Past the faculty. Past the VIPs. Past the general admission. My eyes locked onto the shadows of the back row. At first, I didn't recognize him. It had been nearly 15 years. The man sitting there was older, his hair graying at the temples, wearing a suit that looked a little worn but carefully pressed. He was clutching a program so tightly the paper was crinkled. He wasn't looking at the stage, he was looking right at me. His eyes were the same shape as mine. It was my biological father. The air left my lungs in a rush. The world tilted on its axis. My mother, Darlene, had told me he was a monster. She said he abandoned us before I could walk. She said he was dangerous, a deadbeat who never sent a dime and didn't care if I lived or died. "He wanted nothing to do with you," was the refrain of my childhood. But the man in the back row didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who was terrified to breathe, as if one wrong move would make me disappear. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He raised a hand, tentatively, and placed it over his heart. "He's been writing to you for years," Judge Keller whispered, her voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. "Letters, birthday cards, visitation requests. Your mother intercepted everything. She blocked his emails. She threatened him with restraining orders based on lies." My hands started to tremble. "How? How did you find him?" "I didn't," she said. "He found you. He saw the graduation announcement in the paper. He drove from Pittsburgh this morning just to see you walk across the stage. He didn't think he'd be allowed to speak to you." I looked back at Section 122. Darlene had seen me turn. She followed my gaze to the back of the arena. Even from this distance, I saw her go white. She grabbed my father's arm so hard he winced. "Jenna," I imagined her hissing, though I couldn't hear it. "Don't make a scene." But the scene was already made. The truth was out of the box, and it was walking down the aisle toward me. The ceremony didn't stop for my existential crisis. The line of students moved forward like a conveyor belt, pulling me inevitably toward the stage. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy and disconnected from my body. Judge Keller squeezed my hand one last time, a silent anchor in the storm. "Go," she whispered. This is your moment. Don't let them take this part from you too. I stepped into the aisle. The bright stage lights cut through the gloom of the arena, turning the audience into a dark, humming ocean. I could feel Darlene's eyes burning into the side of my face. She wasn't watching with pride. She was watching with the desperate calculation of a woman whose house of cards was collapsing in a stiff breeze. Jenna Marie Reynolds! The dean's voice boomed over the speakers, reverberating through the floorboards. Summa cum laude. There was a cheer. Not from my family, they were too busy hyperventilating, but from my friends in the student section, the people who had actually brought me coffee during all-nighters and listened to me cry when I thought I wouldn't make rent. I walked across the stage. I didn't rush. I made sure every step was deliberate. I shook the dean's hand, accepted the leather-bound diploma case, and paused. Usually, this is the moment you smile for the professional photographer. And I did smile. But I didn't look at the camera. I looked directly at section 122. Darlene was pale, her hands gripping her purse as if it contained the antidote to the poison she'd fed me for years. Beside her, Brent looked confused, his head swiveling between me and the back of the auditorium. My father, the man who raised me, wouldn't even meet my gaze. He was staring at his shoes, the weight of his complicity finally crushing his spine. Then, I lifted my chin and looked past them, up to the last row, to the shadows. The man from Pittsburgh was standing now. He wasn't cheering. He was weeping, quietly, openly, without shame. He raised a hand. A shy, tentative wave. It was a gesture so full of longing and hesitation that it broke my heart and put it back together in the same beat. I raised my diploma high in the air, not for the crowd, and certainly not for Darlene. I raised it for him. As I exited the stage, the adrenaline crashed into clarity. The ceremony was technically still going, but my part in the pageant was over. I wasn't going back to my seat to wait politely for the recession. I wasn't going to give Darlene the chance to corner me in the parking lot and spin her web of gaslighting. I walked down the stairs, bypassed the row of returning graduates, and headed straight for the side exit tunnel where Judge Keller had signaled she would meet me. My phone buzzed in the hidden pocket of my gown. I pulled it out, already knowing who it was. Darlene. We need to talk. Now. Meet us at the car. Do not go near that man. You don't know what you're doing. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the concrete tunnel. I typed back 3 words. Game over, Darlene. Then I turned my phone off, shoved it deep into my pocket, and pushed through the heavy double doors into the cool corridor, ready to meet the truth face to face. The corridor was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the humidity and roar of the arena floor. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I saw them standing near a bank of vending machines, Judge Keller, looking composed and formidable, and the man from the back row. Up close, he looked even more like me. We shared the same nose, the same stubborn set of the jaw. He was twisting a graduation cap in his hands, not mine, but a plain black one he must have bought just to feel part of the day. Jenna, Judge Keller said softly, stepping aside to bridge the gap between us. This is Thomas. Thomas. My father. Not the man who raised me with indifference, but the man whose DNA I carried. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if afraid I might shatter. Jenna, he choked out, his voice rough with unused emotion. You look exactly like my mother. I didn't know what to say. They told me you left, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. They told me you didn't want me. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Without a word, he reached into the oversized tote bag at his feet and pulled out a thick, rubber-banded stack of envelopes. They were worn, the edges soft and fraying. He held them out to me, his hands trembling. I took the top one. It was addressed to me, dated for my 7th birthday. Across the front, in bold red ink, was a stamp. Return to sender, refused. I took the next one. My 10th birthday. Refused. The next. High school graduation. ADDR. Unknown. There were dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. I sent child support every month, Thomas said, tears spilling over onto his cheeks. I sent letters. I drove here 3 times, and Darlene called the cops, told them I was stalking you. She said you were afraid of me. She said you hated me. I stared at the envelopes, the physical weight of the lies I had lived with for 22 years pressing down on me. I hadn't been abandoned. I had been stolen. I didn't know, I whispered. my vision blurring. I never knew. I know, he said gently. The judge. She found me. She told me everything. Judge Keller nodded. Fraud isn't just about credit cards, Jenna. It's about stealing a life. I looked up at him. And for the first time in my life, I saw a parent looking at me with pure, unadulterated love. I took a step toward him, ready to bridge the decade of silence, when the heavy metal doors at the end of the corridor banged open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Jenna! It was Darlene. She was marching down the hallway, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum. My father, the one who raised me, trailed behind her, looking pale and sick, while Brent jogged to keep up, his phone out, recording the whole thing. Get away from him! Darlene shrieked, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. She pointed a manicured finger at Thomas. I told you to stay away. I have a restraining order. Thomas stiffened, his posture shifting from vulnerable to protective. He stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. That order expired 5 years ago, Darlene, Thomas said, his voice surprisingly steady. And Jenna is an adult. You can't control who she talks to anymore. She's my daughter. Darlene lunged forward, but she didn't get far. Judge Keller stepped into her path. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply crossed her arms and looked down at Darlene with the full weight of the judicial system in her eyes. Actually, Darlene, the judge said, her voice dripping with ice, I think we need to talk about who exactly belongs to whom, and we're going to do it right now. Darlene's face twisted into a mask of ugly desperation. You have no right to be here. Security! She shrieked, looking around for a guard who wasn't there. He's harassing my daughter. The only person harassing me is you, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. I stepped out from behind Thomas, clutching the bundle of rejected letters to my chest like a shield. Jenna, honey. Darlene's tone flipped instantly. That sickeningly sweet manipulation she used when she wanted something. You're confused. He's filling your head with lies. He's a deadbeat. He abandoned us in that trailer park when you were a baby. Stop lying! I screamed. The sound tore at my throat. Raw. And primal. I have the letters, Darlene. I have 18 years of postmarks. Stamped. Refused. By you! I threw the top bundle at her feet. The rubber band snapped, and envelopes scattered across the linoleum like confetti, evidence of a love she had systematically intercepted and destroyed. Robert, the man I had called Dad, flinched as the paper hit his shoes. He looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. And it wasn't just letters, was it, Robert? Judge Keller stepped forward, her gaze locking onto my stepfather. Tell her about the account, Robert. Or should I? Robert went pale. Marianne, please. This isn't the place. What account? I asked, looking between them. Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder. I didn't just write, Jenna. I sent money. Every month. For clothes, for school, for a college fund. I sent checks for 20 years. My stomach dropped. What? I worked 2 jobs. I couldn't afford textbooks. You told me we were broke. You told me I was a financial burden. You were never a burden to me, Thomas said softly. I sent over $200,000 over the years. I turned slowly to Darlene and Robert. The expensive cars, the country club memberships, Brent's fully paid tuition, the renovations. It all clicked into place. They hadn't just stolen my father. They had stolen my future to fund their present. They had used Thomas's child support to bankroll their perfect suburban life, while treating me like the hired help. You spent it, I whispered. The realization making me nauseous. You spent my child support on Brent. Brent, who was still holding his phone up, slowly lowered it. He looked at the new car keys in his pocket, then at his mother. Mom? Is that true? Don't listen to them, Darlene snapped, but her eyes were darting around, looking for an exit. We used that money for the household. For food. Keeping a roof over your head isn't free, Jenna. Embezzlement isn't free either, Judge Keller said, her voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. And unlike the credit card fraud, the statute of limitations on this hasn't run out. I have the bank records. Darlene. I have the cashed checks with your forged signatures. Darlene froze. The blood drained from her face completely. So here is how this is going to go. The judge continued, stepping into Darlene's personal space. You are going to turn around, walk out that door, and get in your car. You are never going to contact Jenna again. If you do, I will file the charges myself before the sun goes down. Darlene opened her mouth to argue, but Robert grabbed her arm. His grip was hard. Darlene, stop. It's over. She looked at me one last time, waiting for me to crack, waiting for the daughter who craved her approval to surface. Go, I said, my voice steady. I have my family here, and it's not you. The silence that followed the slamming of the heavy metal doors was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with the sudden, crushing absence of 22 years of toxicity. Darlene and Robert didn't look back. They didn't fight for me. Faced with the threat of prison and public humiliation, they chose self-preservation. Brent had lingered for a split second, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and panic, thumbing the keys to his new car. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he just shook his head, muttered something about family drama, and jogged after the people who paid his bills. I was finally, officially, an orphan of my own making, and I had never felt lighter. I slumped against the cold concrete wall, the adrenaline finally leaving my system, leaving my knees weak. The stack of letters in my hand felt like a brick. Breathe, Jenna, Judge Keller said, her voice shedding its courtroom steel and becoming warm and maternal. It's over. The hard part is done. I looked up at Thomas, my father. He was watching me with an expression of terrified hope, as if he expected me to tell him to leave too. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands deep in his pockets. I don't expect anything, he stammered. I know I'm a stranger. I know you have a life. I just wanted to see you. Just once. I looked at his face, my face. I saw the worry lines etched around his eyes, lines that matched the years of returned letters in my hand. I saw a man who had fought a silent war for me for 2 decades, even when he thought I hated him. You're not a stranger, I said, my voice trembling. You're the only one who actually showed up. I didn't overthink it. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. He froze for a heartbeat, stunned, before he crumbled. His arms came around me, holding me tight. A desperate, crushing hug that tried to make up for every missed birthday, every scraped knee, every graduation he'd been barred from. He smelled like rain, and old paper and safety. He sobbed into my hair, shaking with relief. And for the first time in my life, I cried, not because I was hurt, but because I was found. I'm so sorry, he kept whispering. I'm so sorry I couldn't get to you sooner. You're here now, I choked out. We stood there for a long time, the 3 of us in that quiet tunnel, while the muffled cheers of the graduation ceremony continued above us. Eventually, Judge Keller cleared her throat, wiping a discreet tear from under her glasses. Well, she said briskly, clapping her hands together. As much as I enjoy emotional reunions in service corridors, I believe we have a celebration to attend to. I pulled back, wiping my face. Celebration? I think my reservation at the Italian place was under Darlene's name. I'm pretty sure that's cancelled. Thomas laughed, a wet, joyful sound. Good. I never liked Italian food anyway. Too messy. I know a place, Judge Keller said, a mischievous glint in her eye. It's not a country club. It's a diner, on the outskirts of town. Best burgers in Ohio, and I happen to know the owner keeps a table reserved for winners. I looked at my real father, then at my mentor. A diner sounds perfect. Better than perfect. Thomas smiled, offering me his arm. It sounds like Thanksgiving. I took his arm. Let's go eat. The diner was everything Darlene would have hated. The lights were fluorescent and humming, the menus were sticky with syrup, and the smell of frying onions hung heavy in the air. But as I slid into the cracked red vinyl booth across from Thomas and next to Judge Keller, it felt like a palace. We ordered cheeseburgers the size of hubcaps and milkshakes, so thick the straws were useless. There were no linen napkins. There was no perfect photo moment where we had to freeze and smile until our cheeks hurt. For the first time in years, I exhaled. Thomas' dad was hesitant at first, watching me like I was a rare bird that might fly away if he moved too fast. But halfway through his vanilla shake, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photo. It was wrinkled and faded. I carried this in my wallet for 20 years, he said quietly, sliding it across the Formica table. It was a picture of me as a toddler, sitting on his shoulders, both of us laughing with our heads thrown back. I traced the face of the little girl I used to be, a girl who had been loved, even if she didn't remember it. I thought I lost this, I whispered. You didn't lose anything, Judge Keller said, dipping a fry into her ketchup with uncharacteristic informality. You were just on a detour. A long, painful, necessary detour. We spent hours in that booth. I opened 3 of the letters. One contained a savings bond he had bought for me when I turned 10. Another had a pressed flower from his garden in Pittsburgh. The words inside were mundane updates on the weather, a joke about his neighbor's dog, a description of a book he thought I'd like. But they were consistent. They were proof of a love that had knocked on my door every single day, even when the door was bolted shut. I learned that Thomas was an architect. I learned he loved jazz. I learned he had a room in his house he'd been keeping empty for me, just in case. As the sun began to set, painting the parking lot in shades of orange and purple, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. It was a notification from Instagram. Brent had posted a photo. It was a picture of the 3 of them, Darlene, Robert, and himself sitting at a fancy Italian restaurant. They were smiling, but their eyes looked tight. The caption read, "Family celebration. Number blessed." It was a lie. I knew it, and now, they knew I knew it. They were trapped in their performance, drowning in debt and secrets, terrified of the day the judge might decide to make those bank records public. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt free. I deleted the app. You okay? Thomas asked, noticing the shift in my mood. I looked at him, then at Judge Keller, the woman who had handed me the sword to cut my own chains. Last November, I said, a smile spreading across my face, genuine and unrehearsed. They told me not to come to Thanksgiving because they wanted less stress. I took a bite of my burger, savoring the grease and the salt. They were right, I said. This is the least stressed I've ever been. My family had banned me from their table to punish me. They didn't realize they were setting me free to find the table where I actually belonged. And looking around at the sticky booth, the cheap food, and the people who loved me for real, I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back. I had finally graduated.